Today, we're responding to this question. And it may seem strange at first, but hopefully it's going to be helpful. I think this is a good opportunity for us to have this conversation. It's essentially this: how does Risen Church work? This is a question. We started this church about 6 months ago, and I've heard it over and over and over again in various forms. People are like, well, how does that work? What happens with money here? How does the volunteer culture, like if I sign up to serve on a team, what does that mean? Does that mean I am, committed? Is it a blood oath that I'm committed to forever? Or you come looking for my family? Like, is that, how does this thing actually work? How did you get here, right? How was there a denomination that put you here? Did somebody tell you to come and start this church? And so I'm going to try to respond to a little bit of that today. And we're going to break it into 3 categories. They're on your sermon notes. If you grabbed a worship guide on your way in, the back of that has some notes. We encourage writing, ink and paper here at Risen Church. We think it helps in learning, and so I'll fill in some blanks as we go along. If that's something you'd like to do, you can follow with us. Are you glad you're here?
Yep.
You excited to be at church today? I got a baby on the front row today, so if you hear her, just know it. She had a fever last night, and this morning she seems fine to me. She's just watching Mom's phone right now, aren't you? Hey, Nora. Hey, girl. We do community together. So, we're just kind of like, you want to bring your kids in the room? You can do that on any given Sunday. For the most part, we have to wrestle our kids out of the other rooms. They love being in their class so much that if we actually wanted them to come in here on a Sunday, it's a real challenge. But today, we got one in here. So if you hear her squeaking, that's all it is. This is life in community. It's messy, right? How does Risen Church work? There's three parts to this. Before we talk about the first one, though, let me take you to Acts chapter 4. Acts chapter 4 is some of the earliest days of the Church of the Risen Jesus that we're still walking out today on the other side of the planet. This started in the ancient Near East shortly after the resurrection of Jesus. He started this movement that became the church, and what gets recorded in the book of Acts is the start of that church. And so Acts chapter 4 are the earliest days of the Church of the Risen Jesus, and this is what it looks like. It says, all the believers were united in heart and mind in verse 32. Does that mean they agreed on everything? No, of course not. It does not mean they agreed on everything. They did not agree on everything. You would see, if you look at the scope of the book of Acts, you have a group of people who don't agree on much. They're coming from all walks of life. That's what Jesus does. Jesus brings people from all over into the same spaces and into the same community, and they don't see things the same way. They've not had the same life experiences, and they don't really even agree on a lot of stuff, but they're united in one purpose. They're united around one idea. We are here to tell the world about God's love and about the resurrected Jesus Christ. That's what the church of the book of Acts is. We have to tell people about Jesus. We have to invite people to a better life with Jesus. We have to invite people to understand and to know who God is and why they're here. And it says they're united in that purpose in heart and mind. And the verse continues, and they felt that what they owned was not their own. So they shared everything they had. This is a beautiful picture of what community looked like in a poverty-stricken, politically oppressed, first-century group of Jewish followers of Jesus. And we can learn a lot from them. We can learn a lot from what they do, what we see them doing culturally, in their context. They're poverty-stricken. They need each other to survive. There are people in their community that do not know if they're going to eat again every day. They don't, and so they pool their resources and they come together and they share their homes and they sell things so that they can make sure that everybody survives. But that's their context. That context isn't necessarily meant to be carried over for us. We can learn from them, but if we try to force what they do into our context, we'll struggle to be convinced it's necessary, right? Because very few of us in here today, I would almost assume none of us are worried about whether or not we're going to get to eat again today. Like if we get hungry today, you probably have access to food in your own pantry or cash in your pocket or an account somewhere, a credit card or whatever it is that you could eat today. Nobody's sitting here worried. And if you are, please find us. We will help you. We will get you fed today, so you don't have that worry. I'm going to go ahead and say it. Nobody has to be worried about whether you're going to eat today. But they're in their context, that's not true. So we don't try to force their context, and hopefully this will make a little more sense as we move through it. Should we be willing to share everything with our friends and neighbors and family and strangers and even enemies? Sure, absolutely. But do we need to? Not in the same way that they did. There is a context here that we need to understand, and there's a reason I'm showing you that. Our opportunity is different and so our community looks different. Does that make sense? First century ancient Near Eastern Jewish culture, their opportunity as a community looks one way, and so their community looks one way. Our opportunity looks completely different, and so our community looks completely different. Verse 33 clarifies something that carries through. The apostles testified powerfully to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's great blessing was upon them all. So this is central, and this never changes. This is what Jesus commanded his church to do to the ends of the earth. Every gospel writer, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all four, end their story of Jesus' life by saying, by the way, here's the last thing Jesus told us to do. He told us to go and tell people that he's alive. He told us to go and tell people that he loves them. He told us to go and tell people there's a better life, an abundant life, a rich, satisfying life, both here and in eternity in his name. He told us that clearly. And so that's what verse 33 says. This never changes. And then verse 34, it says, there were no needy people among them, because those who owned land or houses sold them, and they brought the money to the apostles to give to those in need. And here again, we're pointing to a first century Jewish context that needs to be put into our context in order for it to become helpful. Is that making sense? If we were to read this and determine, okay, so in order for us to be the church of the risen Jesus, we all have to sell our homes and sell our cars and sell all of our supplies and everything we own, and we'll just buy a farm village together, and we'll all just move in together, and we'll share everything, we'll live on a commune. Well, that would reveal that we're a little unclear on our own context, right? That would reveal that we don't understand our own context. And I know some of you Powhatanners out here are just hoping that that's where we're headed. I regret to inform you. It's not where we're not necessarily moving in the direction of like, let's all sell everything we have and buy a village together and just move into a commune. That would misunderstand our context. And just to be clear here, that would undercut verse 33. If we did that, we would very quickly lose the ability to testify to who Jesus is in our community. We would become a community unto ourselves, and we wouldn't fit into the broader community of people who really need to know Jesus and really need us to be a part of the fabric of what happens here. So, the primary reason I believe this is a misread is that it would undercut our ability to carry out the Great Commission, our ability to tell people who Jesus is and maybe why they're here. And Jesus himself actually warns us of this tendency, and let me share this with you, and then we'll get into the notes of how Risen Church works and why I'm starting with all of this, why all of this matters. Mark chapter 2, verse 22, Jesus tells a very interesting parable. He says, no one puts new wine in old wineskins. Obviously, they use bottles. For the wine would burst. For the wine would burst the wineskins, and the wine and the skins would both be lost. New wine calls for new wineskins. Now, Jesus is using an instrument, using an analogy here, a metaphor here that makes sense to them. This is something everyone understands. If you've got brand new wine and you put it into an old wineskin, you'll ruin it. The wineskin will burst as the new wine chemically reacts with it and changes it, and it will expand and explode, and you'll lose the wine and the skin. And anytime Jesus talks about wine, he is using it as a sacrament, as a symbol of God's covenant with his community. It's his symbol of church. Think of the act of communion, if you're familiar with the story of Jesus serving communion to his disciples, giving his disciples bread and wine, and as he serves them wine to drink, he says, drink this, and every time you do it, remember me. Remember this community. This was my idea. He tells them, every time you get together like this, every time you guys sit down to a dinner table, every time you celebrate me, and remember, this was my idea that you would be together. The church was my idea. That was my idea. It was my purpose. And he warns us that there's always a tendency, and this is the big part of all of this, and if this is too deep and too, too hard to follow right now, I'm about to get a lot simpler and about to go somewhere else, but just for those who are still with me for the moment, he warns us that there will always be a tendency, in every church context, in every community, there will always be a tendency to desire the container over the contents. There will always be a tendency to say, I love this old wineskin so much that I will continue to use this old wineskin. And as God pours new wine into it, it wrecks and we lose the wine in the context because we had fallen in love with an old container. There's always a desire, and this is where we'll kind of try to tie this back around to what is the metaphor about? What is he actually talking about? There's always a desire to go back to old ways, to go back to more familiar ways. Maybe in the context of church and maybe in the context of your own life. There's always a tendency to go back to the old way, and Jesus is just saying, well, if you want the new things that I have for you, you can't hold on to and cling to those old ways so badly. You'll actually lose the new things I want to do, and you'll lose the awesome things that I want to pour out, and you'll lose the better life that I have for you if you keep going back to an old way. Jesus actually says that this desire might just pose a threat to the very thing it claims to protect. The desire to hold on to the old way of doing community, the old way of doing church, and the old way of doing these things in community like this, to say, I want it that way, that Jesus says that might actually threaten the wine, and the wine's the purpose, not the container. Don't mistake what the church kind of looks like culturally. Don't mistake what we're doing in our culture, in our place and time, in our community. Don't mistake that for the wine, is all he's saying. This is the container. And this container's pretty different, right? It's in a movie theater. Like, Sherlock Gnomes is going to be on this screen in like 30 minutes. So I have to move quickly through this so that doesn't happen while I'm still preaching, right? We're in a unique container. But we're cool with that because we're interested in the new wine maybe that God wants to pour out. We're open to the idea of being a little limber and saying, hey, I'm not obsessed with any container to the extent that I'm not obsessed with anything that isn't the wine. Does this make sense? All right. How does Risen Church work? What does our container look like? What have we tried to do in order to receive this new wine that I believe Jesus wants to pour out for us right now? Let's talk about our container. Our container essentially has three parts. I think that's what is culturally necessary right now. I think if any of these three parts, now they are not equal in value, but they are equal in necessity. If any one of these three parts were not in place, Risen Church could not exist as it currently exists. So Risen Church, how does it work? It requires these three things to work in our culture and in our context right now. And the first is community. The first is community. And the first blank, actually, I believe is the word sharing. That we share life. We follow the model of Acts chapter 4 of sharing. But we don't necessarily share resources that we absolutely would when it was necessary, but we're not going to try to force it to be necessary. We're not going to try to say we're not poverty-stricken like they were, so let's try to be poverty-stricken so we can live exactly the way that they live. We would lose our ability to be effective in the community that we're in. We would lose the ability to be effective in the culture that we're in. So do we meet others' needs? Yeah, absolutely. Anytime we can. And if you give to this church, we actually give to feeding people every month, feeding hungry people in our area. And we've done that a little bit in the first 6 months, and we want to do it more and more as we move forward. We want to help people with their everyday needs. But for the most part, our community is about sharing life. That's what's missing in our culture. Most of the people who live within 15, 20 minutes of this, where this church meets, most of them aren't worrying as to whether or not they're going to eat today. But they might be disconnected. They might be lonely. We live in one of the most lonely and disconnected and depressed cultures in human history. We've got all of our needs met, and we don't need each other in the same ways that past cultures have, and so a lot of us just spend our lives alone. And this is why Risen Church is necessary. This is why this community is necessary, because we share life. We band together to help each other financially if necessary. But our approach to sharing life for the most part is more relational. It's we eat together. We see movies together. We cry together and laugh together. We pray for each other. We meet in the context of community groups. And if you had an opportunity to be a part of our first set of community groups, and we kind of just get together in each other's homes and spend some time hanging out. We just eat and normally we watch a short 15-minute teaching video and then talk about it with each other and ask if there's anything that people need prayer for and just be there for it. We're just sharing life, and that is necessary to this community. There has to be a community element. There has to be a friendship element, or we cease to exist. Make sense? This is a necessity, and it is the most important. That's why I say these three things are not equal in value, but they are equal in necessity. This one is the most valuable. This one is the most important. But the other two are necessary. So how does Risen Church work? Secondly, I would say Risen Church works through Sunday, today. This is a huge part. This is everybody's entry level, pretty much. This is where everybody meets Risen Church. This is where everybody sees Risen Church for the first time ever. And when we gather on Sunday, what do? We sing. We celebrate the goodness of God. We pray. We start our gatherings with singing and prayer and worship and putting our focus on God. It's just a culturally fitting way. We're a very musical culture. This is a time and season of life and a place on the world where music is a really big deal, and so we use it. Culturally, we say, hey, maybe that's a good way to connect people with the heart of God, to connect the heart of people with the heart of God. And so we do that. That's why we do that on Sunday. We sing, put our attention on God. Secondly, we learn. We learn by studying who Jesus is and what he teaches. Everything we do revolves around Jesus, the person, the character, the life, the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so every single Sunday, we want people to see Jesus more clearly. That's the goal. And when it comes to learning, what do I want for every single person in this room? I want you to see who Jesus is a little more clearly than you did before you got here. That's all I'm ever trying to accomplish. It's the only goal. If you see Jesus more clearly for who he actually is when you leave, then my goal has been accomplished. That's what I'm trying to do. So hopefully that happens today, or I will have failed and my whole week was for nothing. I'm just kidding. We laugh too, by the way. And if you're new to us, or if you've been here for a while and you're still refusing to laugh with me, you should know the more you laugh, the more quickly I move through my notes. And if I say something that I thought was going to be funny and nobody laughs, I have to spend all this time explaining why it was funny and why we would have a lot more fun together if we just laughed together. So sometimes this happens, this learning thing, sometimes it results in somebody saying, I decided today that I want what Jesus has for me. I want to follow Jesus. And you can do that on a connection card. Sometimes there are opportunities for you to maybe raise your hand and let us know, but we don't do that every Sunday. Really, it's more of a decision of following. You could come. I've had more people since we started this church just come to me and say, I decided that I wanted to follow Jesus. What do I do? Follow, That's the next step is follow. We get you involved in Move Track. We want to get you involved in the fabric of the community. That's the next step for us. And then thirdly, and this is where your blank comes from in this section, community, we help each other. Every Sunday, there is actually a gathering at 9:15 of the people who are serving during this service, the people who make up this team. I'm going to talk about them again here in just a moment, but at 9:15 we have what we call our rally service, and I teach the message, and we spend some time in worship and prayer with them. And we, for the first 4 or 5 months, actually, every Sunday as we ended that service, I would say, what do we do? I was wondering if anybody was in here. Let's see. I'm going to try it again. You didn't know it was okay. All right, if you're in here, why don't you show them what we do? What do? We help people. Right, so we kind of tried to put this in. So anybody who serves on the team, that's how we ended the rally, that we remember, hey, Sunday is about that. Sunday is about us helping people. And so there are people serving in kids ministries right now, and they're loving on your kids, and they're teaching them about Jesus, but they're also doing that to help you so that you're able to kind of focus and you're able to sort of be in a space, and maybe this is the only time you ever get a babysitter. Maybe that's why you come. That's great. Glad you come, and hope you keep coming. For that very reason, this is a good time for you to get a babysitter for free. There's a growing team of people who actually make Risen happen every week by helping. And they sacrifice their own needs and desires to serve the rest of the community. Around 25 people. This is remarkable, and it's just a little story of how this got here. 25 people, 2 of whom my wife and I knew before we moved here 2 years ago. The rest were complete strangers, are still kind of strangers. Some of them I still don't know much about at this point. But around 25 people committed themselves to serve every week that they could back in August of last year. And they've served nearly every Sunday since then for over 6 months. But that's what they committed to. They said, hey, for as long as it takes, we will serve as the foundation of to get the foundation of this church laid. We will serve every Sunday to make that happen. And the people who set up and tear down every sign and banner that you see as you come in, they set up the kids areas, the people who play an instrument and operate a gadget maybe in the back of the room for our services, the people who sing, the people who greet you, they hug you or high five or a smile and a cup of coffee, people who care for your children and teach them the love of Jesus in other rooms during this service. Those people, 25 people committed and said, I'll do that every Sunday to get this thing started. I'll do that every Sunday to help people discover who Jesus is. And they've done it faithfully up to this point. And now we're transitioning out of that season and into the next, into a new season for the church. Those people are being phased out in a lot of ways of their every week commitment into more sustainable rotating roles. And a lot of them have already shifted into a more sustainable rotating role. I don't want anybody who would say, I don't want to serve every Sunday at the church. I don't want you to. Right? Anybody who has ever said, even there was someone on the 25 on that team at the beginning who said, I don't want to do it every Sunday. And we said, good, I don't want you to. Thank you for letting me know that. Instead of saying, all right, well, I guess I will since I have to. We really would prefer that you would just say, once a month maybe for me, once a quarter for me, once every other month I'd take a Sunday and just help other people and commit to that community. But we're trying to phase those people into more sustainable roles and give them opportunities to be served as well as continuing to serve. Some of them are probably still going to serve almost every week because it's their desire. Some people are actually just wired for that. Some of the people who serve in kids ministry, and you got to tell them thank you today. You got to give them a high five or a hug or something and say thank you. Even if you don't have kids, there aren't kids in this room right now screaming and spitting on you. So tell them thank you. That's what kids do. They spit on you. I didn't know that until I had kids of my own. I basically kept my distance from everybody else's kids, and then I had my own. I'm like, all they do is spit on stuff. My microphone is sticky right now. No joke. It's actually sticky because we have kids running around this church. That's what this is, and so we're so thankful. But there are people who actually, like I've told them, I'm ready to phase you out, and they said, phase me out of what? This is what I'm here for. This is my purpose. I'll get bored if I don't walk in my purpose. And like, well, you're going to like this next sermon series. And plus, they go to the service at 9:15, and we share together in this. But I want to invite you, in order for that to happen, in order for us to continue to phase those people out of everyday, every Sunday roles, we want to invite you to consider serving here. And that's not something that happens immediately. There's a process called Move Track. You can sign up. Brent, why don't you throw up this text email? If you're interested in serving, you just want a little more information about it, and I hope it's clear. I hope it's from the bottom of my heart. My wife and I both have been committed to this we've been in ministry our entire lives. We came from ministry families. We came from ministry families that got really burnt out serving for church and got a little abused and a little used at times and really never, and we're so committed to that never happening that if you're a little bit like hesitant about it, you're like, I would kind of like to serve, but I don't want to get taken advantage of. Let's have a conversation about it because we're really, really committed to not taking advantage of. We're really committed to inviting you to something that will be for you. Not something we're trying to get from you, but something that would be good for you, something you would enjoy. We want to invite you to a role that you'll love doing, a role that you will find more life put in you every Sunday that you serve. That you'll start to understand some of those people that we're trying to phase you out, and they're like, you ain't phasing me out of my role. I love my role. Someone we have to go to is like, no, please take a break. You need a rest. You got to just take a Sunday and you're banned from church this Sunday or something like that. We want to make that possible for that team, but we also want to invite you to fill these roles. And so I would encourage you, text us, email my wife there, or you can put it on a connection card today. If any connection cards that get sent in, you get a text from us. That's just an invitation to coffee, lunch, dinner. If you're feeling like a high roller, we're going to buy it for you, whatever. But if you say dinner, we're going to Hardee's, probably. No, I'm just kidding. So please, and also, there's no invisible wall between my wife and I and the rest of this church too. You can also just talk to us, like just catch us after service or some other time, and let's set up a time to get together and talk about it. If this is something that interests you, we really want to invite you to it. I think you'd enjoy it, and there are multiple levels that will fit with your schedule and your commitment level to things. The third category, the third thing that's necessary. So the first two things that are necessary: community. We got to have a family. We got to have this connection to each other in community. We've got to have Sunday. In our cultural context, it's necessary that we have a weekly gathering, a time that we get together every week. And some of you can't make it every week. Most of you can't make it literally every Sunday. That's why we meet literally every Sunday. So if you miss one, you just catch the next one, right? You're out of town for one, you just catch the next. That's why we don't do monthly meetings, because if you missed one, then we wouldn't see you again until 2 months later. And so we understand that. That's the culture that we're in. And so we meet every Sunday, and help is necessary in order to do that. But then the third category, and maybe you'll see why I left this blank, because I didn't want you drawing conclusions before we got to it. The third category is money. The third thing that's necessary in order for us to exist is money. You want to know, how does Risen Church work? And this is a thing that I like getting to talk about at Risen, because we're kind of all chips on the table from the very start. One of the things that people are the most scared about with churches when it comes to churches is, oh, we're going to talk about money now. We get real nervous about it. People have taken advantage of that. I'm sorry for that. I really am. On behalf of church, I don't know if I have the right to speak on behalf of church at large, but if money makes you nervous when it comes to church, I'm sorry. People have taken advantage of it. People have used it to guilt people, to manipulate people. People have built empires in the name of Jesus that maybe weren't right. I don't know. But if you've been taken advantage of, and that's not something we want to see happen here. But I do want you to understand how money works here. Risen Church exists because you give. We don't have any, and this is something that probably needs clarified. We don't have any ongoing help from an outside denomination that makes this possible. We were not sent here by a denomination. Nobody said put a church there and then we'll pay the bills on everything. We'll make everything happen. Every month we pay rent to Regal Cinemas. We have a contracted partner relationship with Regal. They do know we're here now. They figured it out. I'm just kidding. It was that way from the start. They figured it out. Oh, you thought maybe like nobody's using the theater. I wonder if we can just sneak in there before they show movies. So we pay rent to Regal. We pay a form of sort of renter's insurance and a liability insurance. We buy supplies and gifts for this community of faith. There's never been anything, and never will be. Can I say never? I'm going to say never. There's never going to be anything we try to sell to you here. If you want a T-shirt, just ask for one. You can have a T-shirt. We'll try to do things like give away popsicles after service and coffee before, and little things like that we can just say, hey, that's what this is. We don't charge you for things like that. If we can't do it for free, we just won't do it. If we had to ask you to pay for something, we just wouldn't do it. And so all of that stuff happens. We give to people in need in this city. We help to feed hungry people in our city. One of the organizations that we're in an ongoing relationship with is Feed More. I think it's called Feed More. And then we give at least 10% of our income away. Every dime that comes in here, 1 cent of it. Every dollar that comes in here, 10 cents of it. 10% at least to other ministries and churches around the world. It's just the first check we write. It's automatic. Once we see how much money came in the previous month, we write a check for at least 10% of that to church planting and other ministries, and so it just leaves this place, which is pretty cool. So if you give here, you're giving all over the world to all those things. And then in addition to that, we pay my wife and I a single part-time salary out of what is given to Risen Church. We live according to our bylaws. We basically live on. We don't just live on that. We have other sources of income, which I want to clarify something else about that I think is important to say. But we about a 3/4 of what our bylaws say would be a full-time salary. We get 3/4 of that, and that's what some of the money goes to here. And all of that is done out of what is given at Risen Church Online. That's risenchurch.us/give, either there or through the Joy Boxes every Sunday. And I think that's remarkable. I've kind of been blown away, like 6 months in. I'm not really a money guy. I didn't come from much money. I'm from southern West Virginia, and I didn't really come from a whole lot of money. And so this was one of those things where, like, coming into it, I was like, well, how are we going to make the ends meet of that? Because this stuff is kind of expensive to do. And from the start, this thing has been self-sustaining, that because you give, because you're generous, we're able to do this, and we're able to continue making it happen. But I just wanted to clarify that it does happen that way. And I did... my wife, as we were reading over this week, she told me you should probably clarify some stuff about our part-time. First of all, we are part-time here because we believe that is the level of commitment, the level of employment that Risen benefits from paying at that point. That's not, we have other sources of income. I'm a musician and singer, and I make money elsewhere outside of this, so we're not just like living. I was saying that to say, this isn't like a feel sorry for Megan and Drew because they're living on part-time income. No, it's not. We're doing fine. You're like, we got to start giving to that church so they can eat. It's not how it works. If our income doubled this week, I would still get paid the same next week. I don't work on commission. That makes sense. And I know that's maybe that's either funny to you or that's news to you. Like, some people are like, oh, I didn't know that I didn't know that you weren't just taking home the money that was put in the Joy Box. If you want to buy my family dinner, take us to dinner, right? If you want to feed us, you take us to dinner. That's not how it works. This stuff is decided on by people that we put in authority over us, pastors. There's one pastor actually in the area, Pastor Stan Grant at Clover Hill, serves on that board and helps make decisions about those kinds of things. I have to run it by him, and I have to say, here's what we're planning to do with our own income. So those decisions are made outside of that. And also, I'm part-time here because I also am committed at this season of my life to being a part of the fabric of the community of people in this area who don't go to church. Like, I didn't want to stop playing music and stop being involved in a scene and a group of people who aren't really looking for church. I wanted that for my own life. I don't think that's right for every pastor. Like, every pastor is supposed to be doing that. I think we're all called to different things. But at this particular juncture, we are deciding to live that. So does that make sense? I just want to clarify that none of that is like feel sorry for us, give more so we can have a full-time income. No, we're deciding to do that because that's who we feel called to be right now. I really want to be. And when I tell you, like, invite somebody to church next week, I don't want to not know anybody I can invite, right? I don't want to say, you guys go out and invite people and I'll be here ready to preach to them whenever they get here. Like, I'm saying, let's invite people, and I'm going to go out and invite a bunch of people that I know because I'm involved in the fabric of this community. In the ways that I can be. Make sense? Then the other thing about money that I would say, and I just feel like it's worth saying just because it's part of my life and it's part of so many of the members of the team here. Many people practice the principle of tithing, concept of tithing, a little bit of a misconception at times, and so I just want to clarify that. And it involves giving the first 10% of your income to the church that you attend. That's our cultural context for what tithing is. It's giving the first 10%. If you've never given and you're considering starting to give, that's a place I would consider, making a target to move towards. Now, I'm not going to downplay it. That's a lot. I will just clarify. 10%. You say, Drew, that's a big check, and I would say, yeah, it is. I'm not going to downplay it. I'm not going to suggest to you it's an easy thing to do. It's the second biggest check that we write in our lives. Always has been. We have always paid like rent or mortgage and then tithe to the church. It's always been the second biggest check that we write, and it's been a check I've never regretted writing. It's been something I've never once wanted it back. Every time I've tested God on that and like, God, I want to put you first in this, and we want to invite you to maybe consider moving in the direction of that. I don't tithe because I think God won't let me into heaven if I don't. I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that God even requires it of us. I think it's an invitation to test him. I think it's an invitation to put somebody else's needs, to put a community's needs in front of our own. We get to pool our resources in that way and see something cooler happen than we could if we didn't. And so that's why I do it. I have about a year or so ago, we got some photos done for our family, and there was this 10-year-old girl that came and helped the photographer and was like helping with our girls and was trying to get them to smile, and she was really helpful the whole time. And at the end of it, I pulled a $20 bill out of my pocket because I'm a high roller, and I handed this 10-year-old girl a $20 bill, and she was like, "Oh wow!" And I told her, thanks so much for helping us out." And she said, "Oh, thank you so much. Would you please don't tell my mom that you gave this to me?" Because, and I know her parents very well. Her mom and dad are pastors. They're really good friends of ours, and helped us to start this church. And she said, "Don't tell my mom, because my mom will make me give $2 of it to the church." And she made me promise. And I broke the promise immediately because I knew how much of a kick her dad would get out of it. And so I texted him immediately. And also, not only because I break the promise for that, but God needs to get his, right? It's my job. I'm a preacher. I need to make sure God gets his. That's not the relationship we would encourage you to have with tithing. That's not really how it works, and they thought it was really fun. But we do believe it's an invitation to a better way. It's not something to be guilted or pressured into, and it's one of the reasons we don't pass a bucket here. I don't think it's wrong to pass a bucket or a tray or something in church. We just don't, because I don't want people giving out of guilt. I want you giving because you want to. Most of the people who give, most of our team who gives, they do it online. You would never know it. You would never know that they give, and they wouldn't want you to. And so that's something we do want to invite you to. So if the band would come, I'm gonna close out. I want to pray over you a couple of things real quickly. And if you'd like to consider starting to give to Risen, this is how we can do it. You can schedule at risenchurch.us/give. It's the easiest and simplest way. You can do it on your phone right now. You could set it up, and my goal is really to see, as the highest possible percentage of people giving at some level. And I realize fully not everybody's going to tithe, not everybody's going to move, but I would encourage you to test God in that, to move in that direction, just to see what begins to change in your own heart. I'm not going to stand here and say, you give that away and he's going to give it right back. That's not how it works. That won't, actually, I can stand here and say it won't happen, probably. You're probably not just going to have God give it right back. It's like, I was just testing you to see if you would. Give it right, here you go, you can have it back. That's not necessarily how it's going to work, but it will begin to shift your heart. Jesus says where your treasure is, your heart will also be. And so my prayer for you has been that if you're not giving at any level, that you would at least consider giving even at the smallest possible level, even at something that's hardly even a sacrifice to you, just so a little bit of your heart would be in this. Just so whenever you think about Risen Church, you think about something that you're supporting. Just so when you're not here with us over the summer, there's Sundays that you're not here, that you know, hey, I'm still making a difference in my community because I'm committed to that part of it, because I have an ongoing thing that it comes out automatically like my Netflix, right? It happens automatically, and I can know that when I'm on vacation in Bermuda, that lives are being changed in my hometown, in my community where I grew up, and where there are people that I love and people that I want to see changed by the gospel. It's still happening, and I'm still part of it because I'm giving. And so I want that for you, but I don't want it from you. I don't want you guilted into it. I don't want you to walk away thinking this whole sermon was about that. It's just, those are the three things. You want to know how Risen Church works? It works like that. It works as a community and as a family and as a group of people who don't all believe exactly the same things. We just don't. We don't all agree on the same things, but we think Jesus matters. We think that because Jesus rose from the dead, that changes everything, and that commissions us to go out and we got to tell people. So we're a community first. We're a Sunday church. We're like, let's get together regularly. Let's celebrate. Let's learn. Let's sing. And let's help each other. And let's help the newest members of our community, people who are just starting to come. Let's give them time to get comfortable here and be served by us. And then maybe a few months down the road, or a few years down the road, or a few decades down the road, they're going to turn around and say, I want to help too. That's what we want to see. And we also exist because you give, which is so cool. It's awesome that we get to do this together. Would you stand to your feet?